General Ray Kowalski walked into the VA that Tuesday morning looking like a man who had stopped expecting anything from the day. He took a seat in the waiting room without looking around, the way veterans do when they've learned to keep their eyes to themselves. It was only when the man across from him shifted in his chair that Ray noticed the watch on his wrist. It was old, with a cracked face and a faded strap, and Ray recognized it the way you recognize something you have tried for years to forget. He had last seen that watch on his son's wrist the morning they lowered him into the ground in 2004. His son Marcus had worn that watch every single day from the time Ray gave it to him on his 18th birthday, right up until the Army sent Marcus home in a flag-draped casket from Fallujah. Ray had placed it on his son's wrist himself before they closed the lid, because Marcus had asked him to in a letter he wrote before his final deployment. And now it was sitting 20 feet away on the wrist of a stranger. Ray did not move right away. That is the thing people never understand about moments like this one. The body knows something is wrong before the mind is ready to accept it. He sat there with his hands folded in his lap, telling himself he was mistaken, that it was just an old watch that looked similar, that grief had a way of playing tricks on a man who had never fully healed. He was 71 years old, and he had spent the last 20 years learning how to carry the loss of Marcus without letting it flatten him completely. He had done a decent job of it most days. He had a daughter in Cincinnati, 2 grandchildren he visited at Christmas, a small house in Fredericksburg where he kept Marcus's room exactly the way it was. But this morning, in this waiting room, with the smell of industrial cleaner and old coffee in the air, every wall he had built came down in about 4 seconds. Because when the young man shifted again and the fluorescent light caught the watch face at a certain angle, Ray saw the crack, a thin diagonal line running from 11 o'clock to the center. Marcus had dropped the watch on a concrete floor in Kuwait and cracked it that exact way, and Ray remembered because Marcus had called home that night laughing about it, saying he was keeping it anyway because it still kept time.
Ray stood up slowly, the way a man does when he is not sure his legs will hold him. He was not angry, not yet. He was something closer to hollow, like the air had been pulled out of the room and replaced with something he did not have a name for. The young man sitting across from him was somewhere in his late 20s, maybe 30, with close-cut hair and the kind of tired eyes that told you he had seen something he was still working through. He was wearing a faded green jacket and holding a paper number in his hand, waiting to be called just like everyone else. He looked completely ordinary. He looked like someone's son. Ray walked across the room and stood in front of him, and the young man looked up with a neutral expression, the kind you put on when a stranger approaches you in a public place and you are not sure what they want. Ray said, quietly, almost carefully, that he was sorry to bother him, but he needed to ask about the watch. The young man looked down at his wrist and then back up at Ray, and something shifted in his face. Not guilt, something harder to read than that, something that looked almost like recognition.
The young man's name was Damon. He did not offer a last name right away, and Ray did not push. They moved to a pair of chairs near the window, away from the other people in the waiting room, and Damon turned the watch over in his hands after he unclasped it, the way you handle something you have thought about often. He told Ray that he had received the watch from his mother about 3 years ago, just before she passed. She had kept it in a shoebox in her closet for as long as he could remember, wrapped in a cloth, and she had told him when she gave it to him that it belonged to someone who mattered, and that someday the right person might come looking for it. Damon said he thought she was being poetic, the way SIP people sometimes get when they know their time is running short. He had no idea what she meant by it. He had just worn the watch because it felt like the last real thing she gave him. Now, sitting across from this old man whose hands were trembling slightly as he looked at it, Damon was beginning to wonder if his mother had known something he did not. Can you imagine being in that waiting room, watching this unfold between 2 strangers? Ask yourself honestly, what would you do if you were Damon right now? Ray asked Damon his mother's name. Damon said her name was Cheryl Ann Booker. Ray did not recognize it. He asked where she was from, and Damon said she had grown up in North Carolina, but spent most of her adult life moving around, following work, never settling anywhere long enough to put down roots. Ray sat with that for a moment. He asked Damon if his mother had ever mentioned anyone named Marcus. Damon was quiet for longer than felt comfortable. Then he said yes, once, near the end, when the medication made her more honest than she usually allowed herself to be. She had told Damon that there was a man she had loved when she was young, before everything went the direction it went, and that she had never stopped thinking about him. She said his name was Marcus, and that he had died in the war, and that some losses you just carry forever without ever being able to put them down. She had not said much else. Damon had not asked. He wished now that he had. Ray looked out the window at the parking lot and the gray Virginia sky above it, and he thought about Marcus at 22, full of life and bad jokes and a laugh that filled whatever room he was in. He thought about all the years Marcus had been gone and all the things Marcus never got to do. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you're new here, click subscribe so you never miss our upcoming videos. Ray went home that evening and did something he had not done in years. He went into Marcus's room and opened the drawer in the nightstand where he kept the letters. Marcus had written home regularly, even in the middle of deployments, because Ray had raised him to believe that the people waiting for you deserved to know you were thinking of them. There were 43 letters in that drawer. Ray had read them all so many times that the paper had softened at the folds. He went through them slowly that night, looking for a name, and he found it in a letter dated 8 months before Marcus died. Marcus wrote about a woman he had met while on leave in Raleigh, someone he described as the realest person he had come across in a long time, someone who did not want anything from him except his company. He wrote that her name was Cheryl and that he was not sure what it was yet, but it felt like something worth paying attention to. There were 2 more letters after that one that mentioned her, and then the letters stopped mentioning her at all, and then the letters stopped entirely. Ray sat at the edge of Marcus's bed holding those 3 letters and understood that his son had loved someone he never knew about, and that the love had produced something that was still walking around in the world, sitting in VA waiting rooms, wearing a dead man's watch on his wrist. 3 weeks later, Ray called Damon. It had taken him that long to find the words, and even then, he was not sure he had the right ones. He told Damon what he had found in the letters. He told him carefully, the way you tell someone something that is going to rearrange the furniture of their entire life, because once you say a thing like that, you cannot unsay it.
Damon was silent on the other end of the line for long enough that Ray asked if he was still there. Damon said he was there. He said his mother had never told him who his father was, that it was the one question she always found a way not to answer, and that he had stopped asking by the time he was a teenager because the not knowing it started to feel like its own kind of answer. Ray told him he understood. He told him he was not calling to make any demands or to complicate his life. He was calling because Marcus had been his whole world, and if there was a piece of Marcus still here, he wanted Damon to know he was not alone in it. Damon did not say much after that, but he did not hang up either. They stayed on the phone together for almost an hour. 2 people sitting with something enormous, figuring out how to hold it. The DNA test came back 6 weeks after that conversation, and it confirmed what both of them had already felt in their bones sitting in that waiting room. Damon was Marcus's son, Ray's grandson, the only blood family Ray had left who carried Marcus in him directly. Ray did not cry when he got the results, not right away. He sat at his kitchen table with the paper in front of him and thought about all the years Damon had grown up without a grandfather, without a father, without the family that had been right there and never knew to look for him. He thought about Cheryl, who had carried this quietly her entire life and had still thought to save the watch and still thought to pass it to her son and still thought, even at the end, to tell him that someone might come looking. She had left a door open even when she was not sure anyone would walk through it. That kind of quiet courage deserves to be named. Think about someone in your own life who held something heavy without ever making it your problem. Sometimes we do not recognize that kind of love until it's too late to thank them for it. Ray and Damon did not become close overnight. That is not how it works with real people, and their story was too complicated for easy resolution. There were months of awkward phone calls and one lunch in Fredericksburg that both of them would describe as stiff but important.
There were things Damon needed to say about growing up without a father and what that absence had cost him, and Ray listened to all of it without defending Marcus or minimizing it because there was nothing to defend and nothing to minimize. A child had grown up without his father. That was true, and it was painful, and no one was to blame, and it still needed to be said out loud between them before anything else could grow. By the following Christmas, Damon drove up to Fredericksburg. He sat at Ray's table and met Ray's daughter Patricia and her 2 kids. He walked into Marcus's room and stood there for a long time without saying anything. Ray stood in the doorway and let him have the moment. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and Patricia had gone to bed, Damon and Ray sat at the kitchen table with coffee and talked until almost 2 in the morning, about Marcus, about Cheryl, about the strange and unlikely chain of events that had led 2 people to the same waiting room on the same Tuesday morning. Damon still has the watch. Ray never asked for it back, and Damon never offered, and somewhere in that unspoken agreement there was an understanding that felt more like family than most things either of them had experienced. The crack on the face still runs from 11 o'clock to the center, and it still keeps time, and when people ask Damon about it, he tells them it belonged to his father. He says it simply and without hesitation now, which is something he could not have done 2 years ago. Ray turned 73 last spring, and Damon drove down for the birthday. He brought his girlfriend, and they all had dinner, and Ray laughed more that evening than he had in years, the kind of laugh that surprises you by showing up after you had quietly given up on it. None of this came from a plan.